breaking news, just hot off the press. We have dropped our first monthly Orbit ranker of 2026. What is Orbit? In case you forgot, it is the Oxford Road benchmark intelligence tool. What does that mean? So at Oxford Road, we are the grateful beneficiaries of the world's largest repository of podcast performance data. And actually, we even go further than podcast with it. But we've got $1.6 billion of advertiser spend aggregated from across more than 500 advertisers. So what that allows us to do is kind of go property by property, show by show, and see on a relative basis what shows perform the best against advertiser goals on a relative basis. So you may have a podcast that you listen to, and sometimes it works for one brand, sometimes it doesn't work for another brand who's sponsoring it, but all brands have a goal. And so this is really about the batting average of that show for brands. There's nothing else like it in the industry. And, you know, you can pay to subscribe for all kinds of ratings data in media. That's always kind of been a thing. You've heard, you know, about Nielsen and everything like that. Well, this really is the first of its kind where we actually can use performance data to help guide plans. So it's a really, really important thing. And we've decided to make some of our data publicly available through these rankers that we now put out on a monthly basis. We just started doing this at the end of 2025. This month, kind of going along with the theme of New Year, New You. What are we all thinking about in January? We're thinking about self-improvement. We're thinking about, you know, how do you change your own life? And so that's what we decided to rank this year, is looking at the self-improvement category. When we put out the list, a few things surprised us. Mental health content actually is outperforming traditional fitness. So not to say that one is more important than the other, but it actually, in this particular case, showed us that content that's about improving your body is actually not as powerful as content that is about improving your mind. Who knows? Maybe that's a reflection of the medium kind of being more about a platform for mental development and growth and interesting conversations. And, you know, podcasts really are a way of mind expansion. The other thing is that the performance sustains well beyond January. And so it's not like there's just a pop and that people are only interested in this stuff when they're setting their New Year's resolutions. This is now kind of an always on category that's pretty reliable for performance. The number one show was the Anxiety Coaches podcast with Gina Ryan, which we have a forthcoming conversation with Gina to learn about her world and how she looks at it. And very interesting because she didn't really, I think, set out to be a titan of industry in this way, but has some really good organic practices that helped her build something kind of the old-fashioned way, one step at a time over a decade. And then you have the number two, the Young and Profiting podcast from Yap Media. That's Young and Profiting. That's Hala Taha. And Hala is a true, you know, when you talk about a mogul in this industry, she has built an incredible business as a podcaster, as a creator, as a network executive, and also as a marketer on behalf of other brands and creators. And so in both cases, we have a chance to sit down and talk to some of these people about what are their best practices. And you get to hear some diversity of approach and how that happens. You can actually download the full list for free with some corresponding insights if you go to oxfordroad.com. The breakdown is in our newsletter. It's called The Influencer. And we hope that you'll enjoy kind of hearing the recipe behind what it is that made these shows so successful for advertisers. So let's listen to today's show. Okay, well, welcome to the Media Roundtable. This is a very, very special and long time coming edition because we are joined by a friend of our agency over a number of years, somebody that I think we've really only met like once at a podcast convention. And I remember her walking into the room and going, okay, this is not a podcaster. This is like a force of nature, somebody with like real star power. And she has built an incredible business, an incredible platform, and we're going to get into all of it. My guest today is Hala Taha from Yap Media. So welcome, and thanks for being on the Media Roundtable. We got a lot to cover. Just to recap for those that are new to the program, the reason we really do this is for the benefit of the advertisers who support this industry, so they can learn about who's in it, what's going on, and how they can evolve their strategies to be successful. So that is our primary focus with doing this content. But what ends up happening is a lot of people in the industry will listen or now watch because they want to get an understanding of where people's heads are at too. And when we can get a creator to come have a conversation about how they approach the business, is very interesting to people. And in your case, Hala, creator is like only kind of part of it, because so much of what you're doing is really about driving results for brands, right? And so you're maybe as in the center of the bullseye for what we like to cover as possible. So anyway, I want to get into you a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about industry, and I want to talk a little just shop about the things that you've done to build your own brand, because I think marketers can learn so much from you. So first things first, I just want to also say congratulations, because I don't even know if this is on your radar, but when we merged Oxford Road with Veritone One, we took all of our historic data and we put it together into a database and said, okay, on a relative basis, what programs perform best to the goals of the advertiser? And young and profiting is number 2 in your category, which we're about to list for self-improvement, which is a huge achievement. And it means that you are actually generating true measurable ROI for brands. And I think that is the highest compliment for a creator that can be given. And so that was kind of the genesis for us reaching out for the conversation. And so just kind of starting with that, let's if you don't mind just giving a snapshot of where you and Yap are today for people that may not be as familiar.
Yeah.
And then I'd love to go back into a bit of your origin story.
Yeah. So I'm the CEO and founder of Yap Media, and we're really a two-part business. We've got our social media and podcast production agency where we do LinkedIn, Instagram, podcast production for clients. That is a very talent-heavy part of my business. And then I have my podcast network that I started 3 years ago. We're the #1 business and self-improvement podcast network in the world. We rank about number 18 globally in terms of our network size, in terms of our amount of impressions. My podcast is the flagship podcast on the network, and I've been hosting my podcast for 7.5 years now. So it's an OG podcast. I was also number 4 on your OG list that you guys put out. I love performing for brands, and my main job at Yap Media is to ensure that my podcast is kind of pushing the needle in terms of innovation, in terms of what we offer to brands, how to maximize performance, and then I always roll that down to my podcasters. So I believe overall my network performs really well, and I always teach what I do for my podcast and kind of cascade that down to the rest of the podcasters.
Well, and to underscore your point, I was talking to somebody on our team earlier today, and I said, I'm going to be talking to Hala today. He's like, she's so great. But he was talking about one of our clients who is an advertiser on your network. And it's not your show, like obviously it's the flagship, but you have other shows, and that the advertisers like, we want to be the first to test anything they put out because it's a safe bet. And so much of this, there's marketers that it's all about risk management, and there's marketers that are really just, chasing growth and have bigger risk appetites. But in all cases, it's an investment, right? And you create a product that is a very safe investment for somebody that's trying to grow. And so
I also
wonderful.
think a lot of it is just our morals as a network. I think we do a lot of things differently at my network. So, for example, when we are onboarding new podcasters, we're heavily evaluating their downloads, the players in which their downloads come from, and anybody who looks suspicious or may have any sort of, impressions that just don't seem like they're authentic.
Are you saying there's
organic.
fraud in this industry? You're saying not all impression numbers are legitimate?
Yes, I am. And actually, I'm not saying that it's any of the networks that are doing this. I think it's individual podcasters who are trying to grow their podcast and doing too good to be true media buys and getting tricked. And then it's me having to say, hey, like your downloads are fake. I'm sorry. And at your current size, you can't join the network, right? But here are some ways that we can actually grow your show organically. So we're also just really strict about who we bring into our network. And we're also very interested in people who not only have active organic podcast followings, but also organic and active social media followings, because we really see everything as like 360, especially in 2026 and moving forward.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder how much of a factor that is, because I know during the pandemic, when there was this big buying frenzy of content, it was like they would look at how many followers you had on, X or Twitter at the time, and they would try to project what your podcast was going to do, and they'd make a minimum guarantee based on that. But I think what happened was a lot of their models were kind of flimsy, and they weren't actually able to deliver just because they had a lot of attention in one media platform that didn't necessarily translate. How do you see the relationship between other media channels and followers in other places? Actually, like, is there a formula for that? Or how do you what's the math on that?
Yeah, so I see it as really going hand in hand, right? So when people are listening to a podcast, it is top of funnel. So people are getting awareness of the brand, they're remembering the brand name. I believe in repetition, right? So all of my deals are month-long DAI on audio on old and new episodes. I don't really love frequency caps. I believe that the more repetition, the better that it will perform on the audio ad. Now, when people are listening to podcasts, they're multitasking. So they're driving, they're working out. A lot of the times they're cleaning, right? They're doing something else. So they're super focused, so focused that they might not be ready to click, scroll, and buy, but they're going to remember. I believe that in conjunction to the audio ad, adding things like newsletter blasts or social posts or something else where they can actually click, scroll, and buy. And YouTube is so powerful now. All of my deals are simulcast now. So YouTube is, 50% of the component. And people can be in the mode of purchasing on YouTube because they're on their computer or their phone, right? And they're actively scrolling. And so I believe that it's those things that enable the performance to overall do better than just podcasters who are just putting their stuff out on audio. And I will often add in other types of promotions for free because I know it helps drive the audio performance when I do that.
Okay, we're covering a lot of ground really fast. So let me try to
I'll just let you spoon feed it to me.
No. It's just I'm like, oh no, that's a whole podcast. Oh no, that's a whole podcast. Okay, so let's go to the relative difference between the types of media that are associated. So you kind of went from the podcasters on your network and how you're triangulating what their exposure is on other platforms to try to project what kind of numbers they're going to do. And you went into the advertiser side, which I think is super compelling. There are advertisers and a lot of brand marketers coming into this space, and they're buying impressions and reach, right? Mm-hmm. Or what they perceive to be impressions and reach. And then there are others that are coming in going, I'll buy it on a CPM, and then it's really about ROI. But in either case, you have to start with a CPM, which is based on an assumption about what impressions are, right? So when you're thinking about how you price to an advertiser, are you looking at all the newsletter impression and the social media impression and the podcast impression differently in terms of its value? Are you rolling that all up? Or are you really charging a CPM based on the YouTube plus the RSS and using that for your impression metric?
Yeah. So I think of every platform and their CPMs a little bit differently. Okay. So for podcasts, and again, We are, scouring through our podcasters' downloads and making sure it's authentic and real. So for me, podcasts are worth $30 CPMs if it's a real organic following. Like 30 to me is like the gold standard. Now, if there's higher demand for that podcast is sold out, we can go higher. If there is a lot of inventory left for that podcast, we can go lower. If it's a huge podcast that have millions of impressions a month that we need to fill, we can go a little bit lower because there's just a little bit more flexibility because there's lots of impressions. But if it's a medium-sized podcast, let's say it's 100,000 downloads a month or 150,000 downloads a month, and it's a real podcast with organic downloads, it is so hard to get a real organic download podcast nowadays, right? And so that needs to be a premium CPM, which to me is $30, $32. If you get an annual deal and it's a long-term deal, we can reduce that CPM. If it's a 6-month deal, we can reduce it, right? So there's lots of different factors. And then there's also the factor of the actual personality, right? If it's Russell Brunson doing the ad for you, it's going to cost more because he's Russell Brunson and people really trust him outside of his podcast, right? So I think there's lots of factors. And then there's channel factors, right? So I believe LinkedIn is a pretty high CPM. It's really hard to have a fake audience on LinkedIn. I think Instagram's a bit lower. I think that there's ways that, it's not as impactful or trustworthy when things go viral on Instagram than it is when it goes viral on LinkedIn or podcasts. And I think YouTube nowadays, I consider podcasts simulcast. Like I don't differentiate really. So for me, when I say podcast, and I also mean the YouTube simulcast. So for me, it's $30 or $32 for a simulcast, whether it's on audio or YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges I think we're running into just from a hygiene standpoint is in the industry is like when we talk about a CPM, what a lot of networks are doing is they're taking a download, a play, and a view, and whatever the platform says that number is, they're rolling it all up and treating all things as equal. But what you and I know is that not every download is actually heard or consumed. YouTube and Spotify have different metrics for how they do it. And so we price, like ultimately the value is in the performance. And so performance marketers, this is a short-term issue. But when brands are coming in, they don't even realize that they're buying apples, oranges, and bananas. They're just paying a price for fruit, and that fruit is all very, very different. And so it all gets stacked together. And so one of the things we're really working hard to do is bring all the different players to the table and say, okay, how can we come up with a standard unit of measurement that is fair and represents exposure so there aren't so many assumptions going on? Now, you've already set a baseline for how you do business. When you mean impression, I think it's reliable, it's legitimate, and it all kind of comes out in the wash for an advertiser. It's not always the same thing though, and if I'm a big brand and I'm going, oh, well, my holdco agency is placing us in podcasts now. What that may mean is they're buying a network. They're running post rolls that are not frequency capped, and and all things are equal on paper, but in practice, it's completely different, right? And so that's where the scrutiny, I think, has increasing impact. It's just people don't even really know it yet.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like a lot of advertisers probably don't realize, what they're buying. But I honestly think that's okay. I like, to me, it's like you're buying a show, and the show exists on audio, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Instagram. Nowadays, when you ask somebody, where did you listen to my podcast? Like they might be like, oh, I watch you on LinkedIn. And I play my podcast on LinkedIn Live. That's part of my simulcast deal. I sell audio, YouTube, LinkedIn Live, Spotify video coming soon, And to me, it's like as long as, people can hear the full episode and listen to the commercial, it doesn't matter where they're listening. And I think it's that diversity and being where the listeners are that actually help performance. So
yeah, no, I'm for omni-channel and by no means trying to restrict what the distribution points are. Like, let people have it where and when they want. I know for me, I might start something on YouTube and finish it on an audio stream. But I think from from an economic standpoint, if you're paying for that exposure and you don't realize, like you talk about a $30 CPM, but you're talking about an endorsement. Your ads are very effective, and a lot of that is how you communicate it, right? I think what a lot of brands may not appreciate is that not all ads are actually equal the same. One might be read by a producer and very generic, and there is no recommendation involved, but you're actually providing an advertiser with a recommendation at scale. Like, one of the big things I noticed listening to some of your content when you start going into an ad is you do the thing that is probably the most important thing as a value add that a creator can do. And I would not say this is something that is to be expected if you're just buying podcasts, which is demonstration. Every ad that I heard you deliver, you were talking about your own experience with it, which might seem like, of course, to so many people, but it is not that common. A lot of times you get a lot of apathy, a lot of people talking from a distance, and sometimes it's not even the creator themselves, let alone having a firsthand testimonial baked into the asset, which is part of what's so unique about this medium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think personal endorsement is key. I think making podcasts entertaining is key. And I think the other thing is a good podcaster is creative and also helps support the brand. So, for example, if I get brand talk points and I'm like, these talk points are too generic, my listeners
Right.
aren't going to know what this thing does, which means they're not going to take action because they're not going to understand. Sometimes the talking points are just so vague that you don't even know what the thing is. You know, it's an all-in-one platform for everything you need for your business. It's like, what does that
Yeah.
mean, right?
Yeah.
So I'll go on their website. I'll start to look at their social and come up with, well, how am I actually going to say this in a way where people are going to understand what it is? So it's all about the creator that you choose and making sure that they're creative and smart and able to kind of represent your brand and talk from a personal endorsement perspective.
And do you feel like you have to get permission for the way you want to come at it, or do you feel like the brands you're working with generally give you enough leeway to say, if what you need is not already in the copy that you're handed, that you're going to go make it your own, and they're going to be okay with that?
I never have an issue. I always make it my own. I only read whatever the verbatim CTA is, but if I think I can make it better, I just go ahead and make it better.
If only we could scale you so everyone did that. That would be helpful. Tell me if you've ever heard of any of these companies: Shopify, DraftKings, Oracle, Warby Parker, Mint Mobile, Quince. I am proud to say that half of the top 10 advertisers in podcasting choose to work with Oxford Road. We are now the world's largest podcast advertising agency, and we do so much more than that. YouTube, radio, streaming. We are on 6 continents working internationally. Reach out to us. We'll tell you about Woven, which is probably the world's largest database of show information that's relevant for brands. Orbit, which is $1.6 billion of aggregated performance data used to de-risk every single campaign. Audiolytics, where we can actually measure ad copy and optimize it to maximize performance. We got a lot going on over here. That's why you can read about us in the Wall Street Journal or the Hollywood Reporter or USA Today or Business Insider. But whatever you need, we try to bring thought leadership that matters to you. Sign up for our newsletter that is called The Influencer. When you go to oxfordroad.com, you can always learn more at the Media Roundtable podcast. We got a lot of interesting content. If you just want to learn about this business, and if you don't care, but you just need somebody to make sure that you're getting outcomes that only we can deliver, go to oxfordroad.com and learn more, and make sure you mention the Media Roundtable, because attribution. That's oxfordroad.com. Okay, so going back a little bit, we kind of skipped over Origin.
Yeah.
At least from a business standpoint, you really leveraged LinkedIn, and you only have 300,000 LinkedIn followers, something like that. So I'm sure that was a big piece of it. Can you talk a little bit about when you first started recording yourself talking and creating what we call a podcast today, and what you really did to build that business?
Yeah. So I started my podcast in 2018. At the same time, I decided to launch my personal brand on LinkedIn. And I really went all in on LinkedIn, and I posted every day. I understood the algorithm, and I became a LinkedIn influencer pretty quickly. I think year one, I got 60,000 followers in the first year. And I had a rule for myself, post every single day. And that just helped me learn and just grow a following. And I also was really, really intentional about talking to my community. So every time I put up a post, whoever liked and commented, I would DM them and start a conversation and really started to build a loyal community. This enabled me to grow a volunteer group. By episode 8, I had 20 volunteers in a Slack group. These were fans who reached out to me and just said they wanted to help me grow the show. And so I was somebody who, I used to work in radio. So I already knew how to audio edit. I already knew how to produce shows. I taught myself how to video edit and grow on LinkedIn. So one person would help me with my videos, one person with my website, one person with my show notes. And I just had all these intern volunteers in a Slack channel for 2 years while I worked full-time, a corporate job. And at lunch, I would do all these interviews with really famous people. I had big guests from the start because I would reach out to them on LinkedIn, and I was one of the only LinkedIn influencers that existed at the time. And I just started growing this show. I also started to put my show on LinkedIn Live as a podcaster. So my first kind of notable thing as a podcaster was I was the biggest podcaster on LinkedIn, aside from like Jay Shetty. I was competing with Jay Shetty, and I was brand new, and I was the biggest podcaster on LinkedIn. And then I took that leverage and I got creative. I used to think that Apple was the only game in town in terms of being a popular podcaster. And I would look at Jenna Kutcher and Neil Patel and all these people who, Lori Harder, and all these people who are in my podcast network now. And I was like, I want to be like them. I want to be big on Apple. And nothing was changing. It was just the same LinkedIn people listening to my show, and it wasn't growing. So I was like, I need to think outside the box. So I researched and looked up every single podcast player. There's about 70 different podcast players out there. I reached out to Castbox and Player FM and Podbean and Riverside at the time. I was one of the first podcasters on Riverside, and all these different podcast tools and platforms. And I was like, hey, I'm the biggest podcaster on LinkedIn. I'll put up a post for you in exchange for you putting me in your email blast, featuring me on your website, featuring me in your app. And I just wanted to be where the podcast listeners were getting exposure and just more notable within the podcast industry itself. And it worked. And all of a sudden, my downloads skyrocketed. It was like my big aha moment. And I started being a big enough podcaster where I could monetize my show. I got on the cover of Podcast Magazine. They called me the Podcast Princess. That name stuck. And then I launched my agency, started making money, used that money to reinvest back into growing my show. I was really into media buying. Really understanding how to grow my show in a way that got me real listeners, that retained, that was cost effective. And I was obsessed with that. I was really obsessed with that. And then I started doing a really great job growing my show and other shows that I produced. I grew about 3 other shows to my size. That's when I first started.
Oh, wow.
I grew about 3 other shows to my size. It's when I first started what is now Yap Media Network. I turned my volunteer team, I didn't mention this part, my volunteer team turned into a real company, right? The same Slack channel as Yap Media now, 7 years later. And I started figuring out how the advertising world worked. And I would just literally have calls with people like Oxford, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I would just ask questions, and I just figured it out, step by step until I really understood how this whole industry worked. And I think because I never was in a podcast network before I started a podcast network, I came at it from a totally different approach where I was interested in selling creative campaigns from the start. And really, it was last year where our creative campaigns skyrocketed across the network. We did so many 360 deals that were creative webinars or custom episodes, paid interviews, all that kind of stuff. I've been talking about it for years, but really last year was the year that it really took off.
And you're the overnight success in 10 years type of thing. And then and when you were promoting, as you've been promoting this whole time, I mean, I guess you've been live for what, 7 years with the show?
Yeah, 7.5 years about, yeah.
Okay, great. And have the drivers of what makes an impact on your growth shifted in that time? When you were doing your LinkedIn play, Like, does LinkedIn work the same? And then is it even a factor anymore, right? Like how does it work today if you actually want to build audience?
Yeah, well, some of the trends that I've noticed is that it's just really hard to grow an audio show. And I think that's
Yeah.
why you have this OG list with everybody performing so well, because really it's hard to grow a loyal audience. And it's all about these listeners. Like, I think I have listeners that have been with me for 7 years that they get, like, they're really into it for 6 months and then they come back out and they're really into it for 6 months. And I've been listening to you for 5 years. What episode? And they're talking about an episode, 6 months ago. It's not that they're just listening continuously. And I think it's that type of a relationship that you have with the listener where it's this really long-term relationship for 7 years. And I think it is so hard to compete with podcasts that started when I started at this point, because it's just so hard to grow an audio show. Now, on the flip side, I think the future is video. Like, I am completely invested in video. YouTube is a social media platform, meaning that videos can go viral. You cannot do that on the audio apps. And the big problem we need to solve with YouTube is consistency. Because things can go viral, it's harder to project what you can actually sell. Right? And so it's all about figuring out how to get consistent amount of views and get that consistency across your videos. And that's really the problem that I'm trying to solve for my network right now. And where I'm focused is just video, not only video on YouTube, but going viral on Instagram and TikTok and kind of pulling those listeners to your YouTube platform. Because I think that's the future. I think the future is simulcast audio on YouTube, but for newer podcasts, it's just YouTube alone, because I don't think they really have a chance to grow their audio podcasts at this point. Well, not a huge one, at least.
Do you feel like your audience is a different profile when they came from YouTube versus audio?
Yeah, I do. I do think audio listeners are a little bit. They seem to be more wealthy, more educated, more intentional, more serious. I think on YouTube, there's a lot of more younger people who might be less focused. But I think generally the future is moving towards YouTube. So eventually I think it's going to be a similar audience, and people are most likely just going to, like, everyone's just going to listen on YouTube.
What do you make of the moves that you're seeing with Spotify and with Netflix?
Yeah, Spotify video I think is really cool. We're definitely leaning into Spotify video. I think it brought a lot of complexities with the way that we're currently selling. So on Spotify video, you can't do dynamic ad insertion, and a lot of modern podcasters have moved to DAI. And the thing is that if you sell simulcast already, if you're already selling baked in videos on YouTube, then selling the baked in version on Spotify video is just not a big deal. So the way that we sell simulcast packages is that we just say, like, there's a certain percentage coming from audio, a certain percentage coming from YouTube, a certain percentage coming from LinkedIn Live, or some people have Substack live stream, right? So live stream is becoming another thing. And then Spotify video is just another way to bake in your ad right now until they figure out DAI. So for me, it's just, wherever as long as we can just do it efficiently, it's fine. It just, I don't think a lot of podcasters are really that equipped to kind of take advantage of monetizing Spotify video with baked in ads. I just don't think it's realistic for most podcasters to manage that.
I mean, there's billions of dollars being left on the table. And, I don't know how deep you get into the attribution piece, but I think that's maybe the most revenue impactful thing to solve. Do you get mixed up in that?
In terms of,
well, just like, on your audio feed, you can, and through most platforms, you can pixel, right?
Yeah.
And so you can get some, not that those are perfect, but they're the best we've been able to come up with to get people off of only living off of vanity URLs and people screwing up the multipliers, right? And we started solving for that.
Yeah.
And as the marketplace has started to evolve, and video has been the 800-pound gorilla in the conversation in the last year. And I think it's great because it is expanding, right? But it's not a straight line. And I think what you say on the difference in the qualitative is really interesting. We just had a report come out that suggested that the ROI is better on the audio feed than it is on YouTube for the same content. Now, have we looked at all the angles? Have we measured that appropriately? Like, I think I would take all of that with a grain of salt because so much of this is so new. But what you're saying does seem to substantiate and maybe provide a reason why. And as you're talking about that, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, well, easy come, easy go. If I can just see something click, like there's less intent. And when we started the agency in 2013. I was dabbling for a long time before that. And what was unique about podcasts was they were hard to listen to. You had to actually stop and download it before you could even hear it, right? So you really had to think about it. You had to go out and search for it. There was no virality. It was something that by the time you actually hit play on the episode, you meant to hit play on the episode. It wasn't like it just showed up and you go, I'll sample that for 4 seconds. And so you think about the nature of that listener and that consumer experience, they're going to be predisposed to want to engage more deeply. And that lends itself to ad performance big time, right? Versus if time spent with it and depth of engagement, we don't necessarily have those metrics. So we know from a reach standpoint, the video piece, it's now definitely the best way to introduce your content to new people, right? And so we have I am by no means like an audio purist. It's just trying to figure out how to use these different tools and kind of play the instruments differently rather than just treating them like they're all the same, right? What are there things you've been able to figure out of how you, I guess, play the instruments differently, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally aligned with you where, to me, like I mentioned, I believe that YouTube and video is the number one growth factor, even for audio podcasts, because to your point, it's the door opener. You get hooked on YouTube and then you're going on a road trip and you're like, oh yeah, let me listen to that. And you pop it on your audio podcast. To me, that's like the main way to grow now. You get people hooked on video, they go listen to your audio. I do want to talk about the attribution piece that you mentioned before in terms of Spotify video. Now, let me ask you, that list that I'm number 2 on, self-improvement, is that only judging my audio or is it judging how I usually sell my show, which is 99% of the time it's a simulcast package across all these different platforms?
Okay, so what we've done is we know that different advertisers measure performance in different ways. And like we have our own compliance process to go like, okay, did you like if I say I got 10 customers from an episode of your show that I sponsored, right? Am I only going off the people that went to a vanity URL and purchased through that vanity URL? Like, because we know that's a small sample, right? It's just a sample. Now, if you are compliant, you probably have a survey that says, how'd you hear about us? And that survey hopefully has a second layer to it so that you don't even have to use a vanity URL that provides like predictive text. So if I go, how'd you hear about us? And I go podcast, right? Then I go, then it says, great, what show or station did you hear us on? And I put in YOYATA. Your show's going to pop up, right? Because what'll happen is people are going to screw up the spelling. They're going to not listen to the instructions and go to the URL that you told them to. They're just going to Google it, and then you're not going to get proper credit. So like part 1 is, do we believe this advertiser is measuring all the customers that came through in a legitimate way? Did we use pixels to measure that? Because there's got to be a source of truth, right? And if you can pixel,
yep.
But you can't everywhere. So you really do need that survey in place. And so sometimes we're normalizing between the two. And sometimes we only have the luxury of one, but then you kind of have to exclude the rest in terms of, or extrapolate on the ROI that you can't see, right? So we have to do a lot of modeling to say, I know we're getting really into the weeds now, but it is important, right? If you're a brand and you're actually trying to measure outcomes and you're not just like a reach advertiser and you really need it to impact your business, you have to deal with this. And so what we have done with Orbit is whether or not you are using a vanity and a survey or a survey with a second tier or a pixel, we are making sure that there is at least a high confidence that we are modeling your percent to goal as an advertiser. And then we are normalizing that across different advertisers, because if I'm a B2B product and I can pay $500 per qualified lead, it's very different than somebody that's going to sell a free trial and that's their metric. Or if I've got a widget that's $30. So now I'm selling off a CPA. All of these KPIs are different, right? But they're all laddering up to a goal. And our job is to go, okay, what is the percent to goal that was achieved for the advertisers? So that normalizes across all the varying KPIs that could be there. And if we've attributed it properly, then we can say, okay, on a relative basis, and then we set a floor of like, you have to have at least 2 or 3 brands to corroborate it, because you can have outliers, and make sure that we have some level of statistical significance. I don't think it's perfect, but you add all that up and that's how you get our list. And like, there are some lists we'd like to put out, but we can't because the sample sizes are too small.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I asked that question because if my show is a simulcast and I'm number 2 out of all self-improvement podcasts, then obviously the YouTube and the LinkedIn Live is performing, and you're able to track it, and you're able to track that performance. There's a big gap, Dan, between the knowledge that podcasters know and the knowledge that brands and agencies know. Like, I don't get told you did a good job and you hit this and you hit that and we're making this much money off you. And of course not, because they want to keep my CPM lower, right? So they're not going to tell me what goals I hit or went above and beyond. My only gauge of knowing whether I did good or bad are annuals and renewals. So my show is always sold out. I get 5 or 6 annual sponsorships a year. If not, like Jan 1, I'm almost sold out for the whole year. So I know I'm doing a good job. So I keep doing more of what I see is working based on the renewals and annuals. But I don't have the info that you guys have.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. Well, can I tell you something? So you worked in radio before this. I worked in radio for 10 years. And I was a local seller for a talk radio station in LA, and I'm on Ventura Boulevard right now. And by the way, we're at the lovely Pave Studios. They're very generous to let us record here. But I would go up and down Ventura Boulevard and others, like cold calling, walking in on businesses, trying to get them to advertise on the radio. And what would happen is you'd put them on the radio. I noticed this. I started in 2003, and like the people around me, they'd call the advertiser after they sold them a radio spot schedule, and they'd go, "Did you get any phone calls?" Now you're playing poker with your client, and you're hoping that they counted the calls. You're hoping they were there to answer the calls, and you're hoping that they're going to tell you if they did, right? But there's a lot of ifs and assumptions going on. It's the exact same thing you're dealing with today. Yeah. So what we started doing was we started setting up phone lines for our clients and vanity phone numbers and going, we're going to actually give you a dashboard so you can see the calls through us. And we're going to record the calls to see if you're actually answering or if you're eating a sandwich while you're talking to your customers and why they may not be completing into conversions. But it's really, really hard as a creator to get access to that type of data. Yeah. And frankly, I think this is stuff that's hard to scale, but for somebody that is, has the savvy and engagement and interest that you have, I think there's opportunities when working with some brands to say, hey, listen, we'll give you certain benefits if you're willing to offer another layer of transparency so that we can actually collaborate and make this a partnership. It won't scale. Mm-hmm. You're dealing with a lot of, especially as larger brands come in, they're not looking at it this way. But for those of us that are in the ROI business, I think it's reasonable, and I actually think it's a miss that more publishers and creators don't come to us and go, what do I need to do to get the visibility that you have? Mm-hmm. And I want us as an organization, just on behalf of Oxford Road, I want us to provide that transparency to the extent that the advertiser will allow it. Mm-hmm. Like, I believe in that transparency. I think that makes for a great collaboration. But yeah, it's a total black box, and it's really, really hard.
And I also think helping the creators understand pixel tracking, we all know how it works, right? We all know how pixel tracking works. But when we're doing simulcast and we're like, does the brand have a survey? Like, how do we know how it's being attributed so that we can communicate it clearly in our commercials? Like, hey, make sure you fill out the survey and give credit to Yap so that whatever,
Yeah, well,
support
and
the
in
show.
many cases, like, well, but to be honest with you, and that's like kind of a hidden art too, is like because of this attribution problem that plagues all of us and has for over 100 years of advertising, right? Like, this is not a new problem; it's just got a different face on it. And what ends up like if you're playing that game, like in reality, you not only have to sell the product, but to stay alive in the relationship, you actually have to sell the call to action and tell the
Mm-hmm.
listener, like you said, like this helps us keep the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't do that, then and you just do a great job selling the product and you swallow the call to action, or you only mention it once, or it's not super clear, then you're doing a real, mitzvah for the brand, but they're going to fire you after the campaign because it didn't get attributed properly. And it's
Mm-hmm.
such a tragedy when you do your part well and you don't get the credit, because if you can't count the customers that you drive, then you're one phone call away, and it's just a matter of time, right?
Yeah, I truly believe that any brand deal that doesn't get renewed for me is usually an attribution issue, that they just weren't able to
Mm-hmm.
count the performance.
Yeah. Yeah. This is pro level stuff. I don't know a lot of creators that engage at this space, but it's cool that because you started as a marketer, and I think you're a promoter by heart. I wonder if you're an ENTJ, if you ever did the Myers Briggs. Do you know?
No, I haven't done Myers Briggs in a while, but I do work. Working Genius is one of my sponsors,
We use
and
Working
oh, I
Genius.
love working. So I'm an inventor
Uh,
and a galvanizer.
yeah, you're an IG. That you're
Yeah.
probably an ENTJ. I'm an IG as well, and I know the pros and the cons. We had everybody at the company
Oh,
do
I
Working
love that.
Genius. Yeah, we were. I don't know if you know the table group, but
I
they've
do.
been
I do.
great.
I
That's
interviewed Pat a bunch.
Oh,
Patrick
great.
Lencioni.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Patrick Lencioni. Well, I have not interviewed him, but I have. We have some partners from his group that have come in and done some
Mm-hmm.
really good work, and they had us do the Working Genius. Now, actually applying that is it takes a lot of deliberate work, right? But I think that Working Genius is. I mean, since we're talking about it,
Yeah.
do you want to just give a quick commercial for what it is?
Yeah, I love Working Genius. So it's your 6 working types. It's not a personality
Mm-hmm.
test. And you have 2 geniuses, 2 competencies, 2 frustrations. Everybody has 2. And it helps you understand what you're naturally gifted at, what frustrates you, how to work better with your team members, how to operate meetings more efficiently, the stages of a project, what gaps might be missing in your organization in terms of working strengths, and how to fill any, if you guys have a lot of weaknesses, how to fill those weaknesses.
Yeah, and it's kind of what I like about it is it's sort of like if you ever did Gallup, the soar with your strengths. It's just the idea that you don't have to be great at everything, and where your interests lie, your talents are
Mm-hmm.
generally going to correspond. And so, like, if you can get people, like, nobody's perfect at stuff in an organization, and it takes a village. And if you can get yourself doing the parts that you're really successful at and let other people do the other pieces that they're going to be successful at, the whole is going to be greater than the sum of its parts, right? I'm curious, do you know which are the bottom 2 for you?
Yeah. So bottom 2 are wonder and enablement. Surprisingly, wonder and enablement. I don't like to handhold. I'm too busy, and I like to invent in my bubble and go, 1-2 years ahead. But I don't like to step back and think, are we even working on the right thing, or
Yeah.
where am I going to
Yeah, so
be in
you want to
20
get down
years?
to it. Yeah, so the difference is where you'd get frustrated working with me eventually is that I have a high, even though my wonder is a second level, it's kind of high on that. So I'll want to question and question and question and look at it from every angle. And you're like, can we make a decision and move
Mm-hmm.
on, please? But I have no discernment and I have no enablement.
We're the same.
So
I think lots of CEOs have no enablement, surprisingly. That's why we have
yeah, well, there's
managers.
I wish I had discernment though. That would be so cool. Then I wouldn't say yes to everything, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, um, so bringing that, I guess, all this back to marketing. So, like, I think what just happened there is a very organic conversation about an advertiser on your show who's a lot more than an advertiser. It's somebody that actually has a relationship with you, that you believe in the product, you use the product,
Mm-hmm.
you can talk about it, and it's like it's just an extension of what you're doing.
Yep.
And I think that's a perfect case study for the highest use of what this platform,
Mm-hmm.
what this medium, whatever, however you consume it, Like that's the highest that I think it can offer. And that's why it is so much different than every type of advertising that's ever been available in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really manufacture trust and personal recommendation and demonstration at scale when you have a different canvas. You can't really do that on a billboard. You can hold up a product and say, I think this is great, right? But it's different. And I think we're in a space that has the potential to be the most significant change agent. And whatever you think of the outcome, like it just swung a presidential election, right? So, and I think we're going to see it continue to play a part in all levels of society. And people need to understand the power of what we're playing with here and really understand the tools. And you just, you're as good as it gets in doing that. And I'm grateful that we get to have this partnership that I think we've been developing, and our team has just spoken so highly of you over the years because of the level of kind of intense passion that you bring to it. So thank you for that. It's it's a privilege to work in this industry, and it's a privilege to know people like you who are really wielding it to really create impact in real life.
Well, thank you so much. I love working with your team. You guys are our number one partners when it comes to brands. You're always our top priority in terms of supporting your brands because we just love working with you guys. And I think it's been like 4 or 5 years since we started working together. So grateful for our relationship.
It's been a while. And so as maybe a bonus before we wrap up, any advice that you have for the marketer who is either newer to this space or just hasn't been, maybe they're just distracted and they're trying to juggle 6 different, media channels. But what if you just had one piece of advice you could give to everybody who wants to be successful in this space, what would it be?
Oh my gosh, Dan, I feel like I could talk about this. I feel like I have so much to talk about in general. But...
Okay, your top 10 then.
Okay. First of all, the way that I see this space evolving is that it is about the creator. It is about the internet personality. I keep thinking of that word. To me, it's not about the channel. It's not about audio, YouTube, social. It doesn't matter. What you're picking is the creator. Okay, you're picking the creator you want to represent your brand, the creator that has an audience that's going to have the right brand fit. So that means when you're selecting a podcast, don't just look at the I feel like a lot of the marketers just pick the podcast cover. Sometimes, I'll be talking to a brand and they'll say, send me an RFP, and I'll be really intentional. Like, I think these podcasts are going to crush for them. This is why, blah, blah, blah. And then they pick some other podcasts that I'm like, this is not going to perform for you. Did you just pick it based on the podcast cover, or like what are you picking it about? So study the creator. Go on their Instagram. Go on their LinkedIn. Do they have organic engagement? Go to their reviews. When was the last time they got a written review on their podcast? Was it 3 years ago? That's a red flag, right? So do they have organic engagement? Do they have recent reviews? Do they seem like the people that are commenting on their stuff are the type of people that are going to buy your stuff? Does this creator sound smart? Do they speak well? Do you think that they could represent your brand in a satisfactory way? If not, you don't want that person reading the commercial. I've fired people from my network just because I don't like the way that they read commercials. Because I'm like, you're just not doing a good job, and I'm embarrassed to represent you,
That should be on the cover of your deck for advertisers, by the way.
But yeah, so I think it's really picking the creator and actually studying their audience and not looking at the surface level stats or podcast cover and like really digging a little deeper.
Amen. Well, Hala, this was wonderful, and I hope it's the beginning of many conversations that we get to have in front of many brands who can really benefit from the things that you have in that mind of yours. So thank you for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in this medium that is the greatest canvas for the free and open exchange of ideas, and we want you to use your influence for good by advancing voices that don't just entertain but also edify, as we have here today. If you're a marketer, you're looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, You should call us, but you should also go to Yap Media because they're pretty good at that, as has been demonstrated for you here. If you want to get a hold of us, you go to oxfordroad.com, and you also subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. You can find us on LinkedIn. Hala, how should they find you?
You guys can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name. It's Hala Taha. You can go to yapmedia.com, and you can find Young and Profiting Podcasts wherever you listen to podcasts.
And I want to say special thanks to the people at Pave Studios who have given me a place to work today and conduct this interview. Max Cutler and the whole team, as well as Haley, Bianca, Rocio, Kyle, Ezra, Everett, Neil. It takes a village. The team at Podcast One, and of course, everyone at Yap Media that's helped make this happen. As always, influence responsibly.